because it's so out of control. Lisa Allaire, let's bring in your reporting on your podcast on politics, because you're looking at private school, prep school behavior back in the day. You interviewed Catherine Kendall, one of the first accusers against Harvey Weinstein. The difference there was that there were many more accusers after, right?
Right, of course.
And so, first tell us about your reporting there.
Well, you know, we just want to get a sense of what this might be like for Dr. Blasey. We know that she's, you know, not really speaking to the press, but we decided to talk to other people who had gone through, you know, putting their story out there and then seeing how it becomes, you know, transformed in the media. And look, what we found is it's important to remember that there is a person at the center of all this. And, you know, whether she testifies or not, but I think particularly if she testifies, at the end of this, her life will be unrecognizable. Mm-hmm. In some ways it is already, right? We know she has had death threats. She's moved out of her house. So there is some, whether it's true or not, she is taking some serious risk with her own personal life. And the other thing we've written about that I think is really important to remember is this is an issue that has proved to be deeply resonant with women across the country, particularly women voters. You know, I sort of figured when this started happening that everyone would go to their corners, Republicans would stand by Kavanaugh, Democrats would be against him, and we've seen that. But the place where we haven't seen that is with women voters. And in the polling and anecdotally, we've seen that they have turned against Kavanaugh in pretty notable numbers. You saw that in the NBC poll. Anecdotally, I was talking to a campaign manager of a Democratic House challenger, and the campaign manager was telling me that they had an influx of volunteers. A lot of older women, women who remembered what happened to Anita Hill, have been coming into the office, stopping in, saying, "How can I help?" That's, of course, you know, one anecdote from one part of the country, but the polling backs that up. That this is something that, you know, depending how it all plays out, really could have implications in the midterm elections.
So I'll turn the question back in, to your first statement, and that was that you know, in your reporting, you're saying there's a person at the center of this, and you're looking at how her life has changed. And I guess some might say, well, there's also another person at the center of this, and that's Brett Kavanaugh, whose life has completely changed. By the way, I'm not a fan. I don't think he should be confirmed. But isn't that something, and will you be looking at that next?
Of course, that's a really important point, too. And there was some reporting in the Journal yesterday, I believe, that his wife has gotten death threats, and it's obviously had a major transformational impact on his life as well. So, but at the end of this, you know, he may end up being a Supreme Court justice. I think there are also questions about how this will change the institution, kind of jumping back to what, you know, you guys were talking about at the beginning of the show. It's hard to see. His approval ratings are now underwater. You have Democrats talking about investigating him, even if he's confirmed, if they win control of Congress. So I think this could have a real impact on how, and maybe already has, how Americans view the Supreme Court. And that feels like a pretty concerning thing for our democracy as well. So I think that's I would think that's an important thing for the members of Congress to keep in mind, that what the impact of this politicization could have on sort of how Americans view the court and how, you know, Americans look at their democracy.
Exactly. And following up on that great point, Jeremy, who would want to put their family through something like this in the future? I mean, again, looking at both sides, you could talk about Dr. Ford and her children. You could talk about Brett Kavanaugh and his children. There's so many people I talk to when I say you need to get involved. We need good people involved. And they say, well, you know, I'd be fine with it, but I'm not going to put my spouse and I'm not going to put my kids through it. The same thing with me. I really, after 25 years, I just don't care what anybody says about me.
Right.
But you know what? It impacts my kids.
Right.
Yeah. Well, look, there are two people at the center of this, absolutely, but there's also one overriding important thing that I think we need to address here, and that's that this is a lifetime appointment that will shift the ideological balance of the Supreme Court for a generation, and that's why you are seeing a zero-sum, no holds barred campaign from both sides to either stop this or ram this through. I mean, let's not be naive about that. The future of Roe v. Wade is at stake. This is
so you imply, but look, that's a terrible thing to say in this respect. Presumably, Mrs. Ford is telling the truth, or she's not. She's not doing this because the future of the Supreme Court is at stake.
No,
and
I'm
Roe
not.
v. Wade
I'm
is
not
at
saying
stake.
she's doing that. I'm saying.
Well, so
I'm
that
saying
is a separate.
I'm saying both
We don't know
sides
that.
are pushing so hard.
Well, no, but I think you have to distinguish
we're
the
gonna get
policy
Bill,
fight,
and then
which
go
is
back around.
fierce and legitimate, from the personal charge needs to be fully aired, and people need to have the chance to make the accusation and defend themselves against the accusation. And I very much object to the notion of conflating these things together. It is really wrong to say there's a huge amount at stake here, the future of judicial decisions is here, and therefore...
Yeah, but let's not pretend that that's not a consideration.
Hold on a second.
Do you believe it's a consideration, Professor Ford?
I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying, like, let's not have this argument in a vacuum.
Well, but it is a separate issue.
Think, though, it is important because, Susan, it explains why so many people that I've known for so long are saying things that are so deeply offensive on Twitter right now, calling Dr. Ford a fabulist, when basically the people calling her a liar have no idea. Other friends on the left of mine who are basically going on cable TV and convicting Brett Kavanaugh of being an attempted rapist. I mean, on both sides. To Jeremy's point, it doesn't explain perhaps what Dr. Ford is doing, but it does explain the ugliness of this.
The ugliness. That's what I'm saying.
It does not
tribalism.
forgive it. In fact, we have to rise above this and show more grace. Or, as Lisa said, good people are going to stop coming forward and offering their service to America.
Well, to that point, let's not forget, this woman wanted to stay anonymous. She was outed by Democrats because of the very reason of bigger issues in play, because of the way that having a conservative on the Supreme Court. This was their Hail Mary pass. And then everything else happened. There's no... If you can't, that's part of the essential part of this argument. This was a political play, and it all is. And now this woman is caught up with it. Judge Kavanaugh is, and I agree with you, Joe. Who would want to go into this business? How are we going to have good justices? How are we going to have good elected officials if they're going to be treated this way?
Guys, Donnie, this
social media.
I know you want to talk, Donnie, but like we said yesterday, this is the second time in 25 years that a woman who feels like she has been sexually harassed, believes she has been sexually harassed, has evidence that she wants to bring forward that she's been sexually harassed, has gone to the Democratic Judiciary Committee, has said, I want to remain anonymous, and then they outed her. Would any of us, whether we believed her or not, and at the time, more people believed Clarence Thomas, I think, in some polls I've seen. Would any of us have wanted to carry the burden that Anita Hill has carried over the past quarter century?
No.
Is anybody going to want to carry the burden that Dr. Ford is going to carry for the next quarter century? No. Because they were outed for political reasons.
Whether she was outed.
No, she
yes,
was. She was.
Okay.
She was.
Okay, let's give
she
you.
She said, "I want to remain anonymous."
You're right. Correct.
By the way, the Democrats. Let me finish. This is important for Americans to remember. They held the hearings. They didn't turn out the way the Democrats wanted them to turn out. Kavanaugh was cruising towards a vote where he was going to be on the court, and at that point, they then outed her. And Dianne Feinstein said, I have a letter. I can't tell you who it's from, but it is so serious against Brett Kavanaugh. We're taking it to the FBI.
But where we are now, correct, where we are now, and this is still a function of the president that we elected, is a moment in time where women, this is not about Dr. Ford anymore. This is, I believe, every woman, fair or not fair, any woman, and it's pretty much every woman, that has ever been felt that they have been victimized, that they have been preyed upon. This is a moment in time where, fair or unfair to Judge Kavanaugh, whether this happened or not, This is a moment in time where women are just, I believe, saying enough is enough.
I just
is
totally
enough.
object to this whole.
No, let me finish, Bill.
How
let
can
me
you
finish.
say fair or unfair?
Well, I'm just
Kavanaugh?
I'm just seeing what's going on.
Well, you can be a sociologist and discuss the deeper
let's
implications
keep it
of
down.
this.
People
but
are
this
eating
is
their grits right now in Florida. Go ahead.
Because it's bigger than this. It's a reaction to who we elected 2 years ago. It's a reaction what started with Harvey Weinstein.
That's
It is a
good.
reaction to so fair or unfair. That's what's
Well,
going
that's
on.
fine as a matter of analysis, I guess. But I also think the whole point of a decent liberal democracy is a society that has the rule of law and due process. So you take each case on its own and try to deal with it fairly.
But unfortunately,
now,
it
if
does
you
not
wanted
exist in a vacuum. It just doesn't. I mean, that's
well,
just
but
the
you know
world we're
what?
living in.
The whole point of the way trials work is to try to say, wait a second, there could be many, many cases where things have happened that are terrible, and maybe we should change the laws and change our mores. But in this case, we need to treat these individuals fairly.
Yeah, we certainly do.
Hopefully.
Peter Baker, I heard a truck. Did anybody
I
hear
did.
a truck?
That was Peter.
You're not in that dark shadow
Trying to drive
studio
away.
again, are you? Peter, it is important to remember too, and I haven't said it to this point, but I supported Roberts, I supported Alito, I supported Gorsuch. Kavanaugh makes me very uncomfortable. I think he was selected because of a 2009 article that he wrote, law review article that he wrote, where he said a president can't be indicted. So I'm very concerned about the expansive powers he wants to give presidents, and of course that doesn't matter to anybody except for the fact that I'm now going to say elections do have consequences. And if Donald Trump gets elected president of the United States in the Electoral College, then he gets to pick who's on the court, right?
Well, this is one of the reasons why this is so polarized, because the Democrats agree with you, except that they're thinking about Merrick Garland, right? They're thinking about 2016 when President Obama, who was a duly elected president, did not get to put his choice on the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of raw feelings out there. When you hear the Republicans saying the Democrats are being unfair, how can they abuse the process this way, you hear Democrats saying, oh, wait a second, what about Merrick Garland? And you're going to continue having this kind of like,
Back and
baggage that's going to hold, it's going to haunt this process now going forward years. And remember one thing, the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas process, which we keep referring to, understandably, took place a year before the 1992 elections. This is happening in the teeth of the campaign, just 6 weeks away. We haven't seen a situation like this. This is going to change in a possibly dramatic way the conversation that we're having as people go to the polls. Early voting starts, I think, today, or at least in the next couple of days. You're going to see people voting on this issue. It could change the way people start to think about things. So both parties see a lot at stake. Both parties are very nervous, and nobody can say for sure how this is going to affect that. But it's a big, big thing.
And Lisa, what a great point by Peter. Democrats had a duly elected president who put, my gosh, a really qualified centrist jurist forward to be on the Supreme Court. Republicans held up the nomination for 293 days. And I can tell you as a conservative, the baggage of the Bork nomination and Ted Kennedy's speech, that stayed with me for 20 years. I can't even imagine how long I don't call it a travesty, that Merrick Garland had to endure, how long that will stay with Democrats.
Right, and I think that's a really excellent point. And what you see is this slow unraveling of norms, right? How we handle Supreme Court nominations, how we talk about the other party. That's sort of gotten us to this point where the parties feel like it's no prisoners, everything is at stake. And of course, as Jeremy pointed out earlier, there is a lot at stake. This could change this would change the composition of the court for a long time. But it still feels like there should be a way to conduct this process with some respect for the other side. And that's really not what we're seeing. And honestly, I'm not sure that's what voters want. It feels like voters are also in a take no prisoners kind of mood. And it's hard to imagine that this does anything but provides a really big shot of adrenaline into the electorate. The question is, how does it shake out? Does it shake out more in Democrats' favor or more in the Republicans' favor? And right now, from what we're seeing in the, granted, very early polling, it looks like, along with a lot of other things that we're seeing out there in the political landscape, this may be favored favoring Democrats.
So, and by the way, Bill
Politically.
Kristol's running for, politically. Bill Kristol's running for president. Maybe he will bring us all together. Bill, will you?
I think not me, but anyone other than Trump would help.
That's
I
true.
would say that once we get past this, 2020, a civilized campaign between a non-Trump Republican and a
Yeah.
reasonable Democrat, that would be something to hope for.
From your lips to God's ear. Alex Gorson gave me that.
Peter Baker, Lisa Lehrer, thank you
Thank
all
you,
very
guys.
much.
That was
Fascinating
great.
conversation. Still ahead on Morning Joe.
Oh, by the way, Lisa, what's the podcast again, just for people that want to listen in?
It's a newsletter. You should sign up at NewYorkTimes.com/onpolitics, and we are daily. In the morning, you'll get all the coverage from the Times, and afternoon, we'll help you make sense of it.
I love it. New York Times
I'm a-
newsletter. Sorry, I said
I'm a
podcast.
detail guy, you know. So
Very
Yeah.
good. I'm signing up.
newsletter. So
all right, still
that
ahead.
sounds great.
Thank you, Lisa. Still ahead on Morning Joe. From serving in the military to serving on Capitol Hill, more and more veterans are eyeing politics. What it means for actually getting things done in Washington. Plus, some in the DOJ aren't fans of the president declassifying sensitive information. American allies apparently aren't fans of it either. Why the president is now fielding calls from overseas on the issue. That's next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.